If you're trying to get a handle on how to make fashion more sustainable, it can feel like you're facing a tidal wave of information.
It really can. It's complex.
So today, we're going to try and navigate that for you. We've brought together a really compelling set of sources, everything from analyses of the industry's pain points and how consumers are behaving.
Yeah, all the way through to like brand transparency initiatives, circularity.
And why those green claims you see aren't always what they seem.
Exactly. Greenwashing is a big one.
Our goal here is really to extract the most important insights, those genuine aha moments that will give you a clear understanding of where sustainable fashion is right now, the major obstacles, and the real progress being made.
Absolutely. And we're drawing on perspectives from quite a few places: POMP, McKinsey & Company, Fashion Revolution, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation.
Carbon Trail, Aptine, Lindenwood University Online, Bank and Vogue, and Sustainability Magazine, too.
Yeah, each one offers a really valuable angle on this whole picture.
Okay, let's unpack this then. One of the immediate challenges that POMP highlights is that sustainable materials, like organic cotton, they often cost more.
They aren't always easy to get in the quantities needed. Availability is an issue.
Right. Then you add in the more sustainable ways of actually making the clothes. Things like, non-toxic dyes, regenerative farming, using less water.
Yeah.
Those costs add up too.
And ethical labor paying living wages. That's a huge cost factor that fast fashion often externalizes.
Which links directly to what POMP says about fast fashion's influence, doesn't it?
It really does. POMP connects this directly. Consumers have just gotten so used to incredibly low prices for years.
Prices that, let's be honest, often don't reflect the true environmental or social costs.
Exactly. So that creates a significant hurdle when you're trying to convince people, hey, pay more upfront for this sustainable item.
It's like we've been trained to undervalue clothes.
Yeah. Fast fashion did that, and it makes that initial price difference a real barrier for a lot of people.
And McKinsey's research really digs into this consumer behavior side of things.
It does. They found that while, a high percentage of U.S. consumers say sustainability is important.
And they even say they'd pay more, particularly for sustainable packaging in their study.
But CPG executives, the companies actually making the stuff, report having trouble generating enough demand based on those claims.
Ah, that classic say-do gap.
Precisely. What we say versus what we actually do with our wallets.
But McKinsey did find something interesting when they looked at actual spending, right?
Yeah, this is fascinating. When they looked at consumer packaged goods, which, isn't identical to fashion, but there are parallels.
Sure.
Products that had ESG-related claims showed significantly higher cumulative sales growth over 5 years, about 28% growth compared to 20% for those without claims.
So it suggests there is a growing market demand, even if it's complex. It correlates, at least.
It indicates a trend, yeah. Doesn't prove causation definitively in fashion, maybe, but it points somewhere.
Which brings us to another point from POMP. This higher cost can make sustainable fashion seem, elitist. Only for people who can afford it.
That's a really common criticism.
But POMP also offers that counterargument, the idea of cost per wear.
Right, which is such a crucial reframing. If a sustainably made garment lasts, say, 3 times longer,
then even if it costs more upfront, it could actually be cheaper in the long run, per wear.
Exactly. But that requires a big shift in mindset, doesn't it?
Definitely. POMP notes that challenge, getting consumers to prioritize longevity over, the next trend.
And our attention spans aren't helping. Plus, you actually need to care for the garments properly to make them last. That's another factor.
Good point. Oh, and POMP briefly mentioned buy now, pay later options, too.
Yeah, as a way to maybe ease that upfront cost barrier.
But they also cautioned against, just accumulating debt, which is fair.
Definitely something to be mindful of. Okay, so shifting gears a bit. Another major obstacle POMP identified is recycling, or the lack thereof.
Yeah, their third challenge, underdeveloped recycling technologies. The stat they mention is pretty stark.
It really is. Less than 1% of clothing is recycled into new clothing. Less than 1%.
Whoa. That really puts the scale of the waste problem into perspective.
And POMP explains a key reason why. Most clothes are fabric blends. Polyester cotton, viscose nylon, these are really common.
And those blends are just much harder to recycle than, say, a 100% cotton t-shirt.
Exactly. Separating those blended fibers is technically challenging, especially at scale. Single material garments are much easier, but POMP points out they're actually quite rare in our wardrobes.
So the technology to handle blends commercially just isn't quite there yet.
It's not widely scaled, no. And a lot of the current clothing collection and sorting still relies heavily on manual labor because we lack advanced automated fiber sorting tech.
Hmm. Now, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation offers a more hopeful vision here, right, with the circular economy.
They really do. Their vision is for a fashion industry where products are just used more. They're made to be made again.
And made from safe materials, whether that's recycled or renewable inputs.
Exactly. And they argue this isn't just about being green, it actually builds economic resilience for businesses, less reliance on volatile raw material prices.
And the potential upside is huge financially, isn't it?
Yeah, they estimate that circular business models think repair, resale, rental, remaking could be a $700 billion market by 2030.
That's massive.
It is. And what's encouraging is that the foundation sees real progress happening. They point to things like their Jeans Redesign project, which focuses on designing for circularity from the start.
And the success of resale platforms, we see those everywhere now.
Absolutely. And brands like Patagonia with their Worn Wear program. Plus, there's growing recognition that we need better infrastructure, like mandatory EPR, extended producer responsibility for textiles.
Making the producers responsible for the end-of-life stage.
Precisely.
Which sort of loops back to some of POMP's suggested solutions, like consumers choosing single-material clothing when possible to help recyclability.
Yes, and also their point about print-on-demand technology. That could potentially reduce the massive overstock problem that plagues fast fashion. Less stuff made that never even gets sold.
Okay, let's talk about rules and regulations. POMP's fourth challenge hits on this.
Yeah, the lack of robust laws. They argue this allows brands to operate without full accountability, particularly for things like worker exploitation in the supply chain.
It's a really sobering point they make, that even major tragedies haven't always forced genuine, lasting accountability.
It's true. They stress that government policies and industry regulations could be really powerful levers to support sustainable fashion and make it more accessible.
And they do note some positive signs, like stricter rules being discussed or approved in places like the EU.
Yes, but guaranteeing actual brand accountability, that remains the tricky part. How do you enforce it effectively?
This seems like the perfect place to bring in the Fashion Revolution's work.
Absolutely. Their Fashion Transparency Index is such a critical tool here.
What's the core idea behind it?
It's designed to push the biggest fashion brands, 250 of them, to publicly disclose much more information about their social and environmental policies, their practices, and crucially, their impacts.
So it's all about pushing for openness.
Exactly. Fashion Revolution sees transparency as absolutely foundational for any kind of systemic change in the industry.
And they link this back to the Rana Plaza disaster, don't they?
They do. It's such a stark example. The fact that rescuers were looking at clothing labels in the rubble just to figure out which brands were producing there. It highlights how a lack of visibility enables human rights abuses and environmental damage.
You can't fix what you can't see.
Precisely. So the index reviews and ranks these brands based on their public disclosure across loads of indicators: supply chain traceability, waste policies, chemical use, worker conditions, you name it.
And the goal isn't just for us to use it as a shopping guide.
Not solely, no. Fashion Revolution encourages people to use the index for activism, to challenge brands, ask them tough questions, demand they become more accountable.
Okay, now POMP's final challenge brings us back to this tension between scaling up and staying ethical.
Right. The difficulty of scaling sustainable practices without, cutting corners on ethics to maintain profitability.
They really pose that fundamental question. Can sustainable and ethical fashion truly reach mass scale? Or are trade-offs inevitable?
It's a tough one. And this is where Bank & Vogue's explanation of the ethical fashion movement comes in handy.
How do they define that?
They define it primarily through prioritizing the fair treatment of workers, minimizing environmental harm, and actively discouraging animal cruelty.
And they also mention Rana Plaza as a catalyst.
Yes, a key moment that really galvanized the movement.
Bank & Vogue also helped clarify those terms we often hear used together: ethical, sustainable, slow fashion.
Yeah, that's useful. They frame ethical fashion as being mainly about social justice, workers' rights. Sustainable fashion is more focused on environmental impact.
And slow fashion.
That emphasizes quality, longevity, designing things to last, and ultimately encouraging people to consume less overall. They overlap, of course, but have distinct focuses.
And how do brands actually try to ensure ethical practices according to Bank & Vogue?
They mention several methods: regular factory inspections, getting certifications like Fair Trade or GOTS.
GOTS being the Global Organic Textile Standard.
Correct. Also, building strong supplier relationships, and importantly, publicly disclosing their supply chains. That transparency piece again?
And materials.
They list examples like organic cotton, recycled fabrics, hemp, and various vegan leather alternatives as common choices in ethical fashion circles.
Okay, so we have ethical practices, sustainable materials, but then there's the issue of greenwashing.
Ah, yes, the elephant in the room sometimes. Carbon Trail gives a really good breakdown of this.
How do they explain it?
Basically, brands portraying themselves as more sustainable than they actually are, often through pretty questionable marketing.
Like using vague terms.
Exactly. Throwing around words like eco-friendly or sustainable without any real proof. Or another tactic is highlighting one tiny initiative, like a small capsule collection made from recycled materials.
While the vast majority of their business is still based on unsustainable fast fashion models.
Precisely. Carbon Trail mentioned Zara's Join Life collection as potentially falling into this category, where the positive impact might be disproportionately advertised compared to the scale of their overall production.
And relying heavily on carbon offsets without actually reducing their core emissions. That's another one they mentioned.
Yes, that's a common critique of some corporate climate strategies. Offsetting can be part of the solution, but not if it replaces genuine reduction efforts.
What enables this greenwashing, according to Carbon Trail?
A big factor is that lack of supply chain transparency we keep coming back to. If you can't easily trace where things come from and how they're made, it's easier to make claims that aren't fully backed up.
Do they name specific examples of brands facing scrutiny?
They do. They mention H&M's Conscious Collection facing criticism for potentially misrepresenting environmental benefits, and Shane facing accusations of making false claims about certifications and labor standards.
And the impact of all this greenwashing.
It's really damaging, as Carbon Trail explains. It makes consumers cynical and distrustful. It erodes brand loyalty if people feel misled.
And it makes it harder for the genuinely sustainable brands to get recognized and stand out.
Exactly. It hinders real progress.
So how do we combat it? What does Carbon Trail suggest?
They really emphasize the importance of credible third-party certifications. Things like GOTS, Okotex, Fairtrade, these provide independent verification of claims.
So look for those labels.
Yes, and they also note that regulations are tightening in some places. More requirements for transparent emissions reporting, clearer guidelines on how you can label something green or sustainable, that should help.
Now let's loop back quickly to McKinsey's findings on consumer behavior, because it seems relevant here.
It is. Remember, they found that correlation between ESG claims and sales growth.
Right. But they also found that less common or more specific ESG claims were linked to even higher growth.
Yeah, that's interesting. It suggests maybe consumers perceive those more unique claims as more authentic or maybe just better differentiation.
And products with multiple ESG claims grew faster still.
Yes, potentially signaling to consumers a more comprehensive, genuine commitment from the brand, not just a single token effort.
And loyalty was higher, too, for brands where ESG products made up a bigger chunk of their sales.
It all points towards McKinsey's conclusion that companies don't necessarily face a choice between ESG and growth. There's increasingly a business case for sustainability.
Okay, let's pivot slightly. What role can technology play in advancing all this? Aptian has some thoughts here.
Yeah, Aptian provides a really interesting perspective on how tech can bolster corporate social responsibility, CSR, across the board in fashion. Environmental, ethical, philanthropic, economic responsibilities.
How so? What kind of tech are we talking about?
Well, for supply chain transparency, they highlight blockchain, creating that secure, shared ledger to track materials and processes.
Making it harder to hide things.
Exactly. Then you have ERP Enterprise Resource Planning and SFC Shop Floor Control Systems. These give companies a much better unified view of their whole operation.
Helping optimize resources and monitor conditions.
Yes, improving visibility, optimizing resource use, tracking sustainability metrics.
What about the manufacturing process itself?
Aptian points to AI and machine learning. These can optimize processes to minimize waste, reduce energy consumption, improve quality control, all contributing to more sustainable manufacturing.
And getting the products to us.
Transportation Management Systems, or TMS, can help optimize logistics to reduce distribution emissions. Smarter routing, better load planning.
Okay, so that covers a lot of the environmental side. What about the ethical, the labor side?
Technology can help there too. Aptian mentions IoT Internet of Things devices. Think sensors in factories, monitoring temperature, air quality, maybe even machine usage for safety.
Real-time monitoring for better conditions.
Potentially, yes. And those ERP and SFC systems can also help manage worker performance data, payroll, scheduling in a fairer, more transparent way. Vendor management portals within ERPs can also track supplier certifications and audits.
And thinking about the whole life cycle of a garment.
PLM software product lifecycle management is key there, according to Aptian. It allows companies to build CSR right into the product's journey.
From the very beginning.
Yeah, from designing with sustainable materials in mind, planning for durability and recyclability, managing chemical use, all the way to end-of-life considerations and providing consumers with better product information.
They also mentioned consumer engagement tech.
Right. Things like AR, augmented reality, and VR, virtual reality, could be used for virtual try-ons, reducing returns, or maybe even immersive experiences showing where clothes come from, and CRM systems for better communication about sustainability efforts.
It seems tech has a huge potential role to play across the value chain.
Definitely an enabler if used effectively.
Okay, finally, let's look at the luxury end of the market. Sustainability magazine profiles some of their strategies. What's the general picture there?
Well, it's interesting. Sustainability magazine notes that many of the big luxury conglomerates like LVMH and Kering actually have quite detailed, science-backed sustainability roadmaps.
So they're taking it seriously, setting targets.
It appears so, and some have achieved pretty high ratings for their environmental impact management.
Can you give us some specific examples from the article?
Sure. Stella McCartney is an obvious one, a longtime pioneer. Cruelty-free materials, circularity goals, investing in innovative materials like mycelium leather.
Or mushroom leather.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And materials made from greenhouse gas emissions, believe it or not. Really pushing boundaries. They even developed a fully circular monomaterial parka.
What about Vivienne Westwood?
Her legacy continues with that core message: buy less, choose well, make it last. Big focus on responsible sourcing, organic, recycled, regenerative cotton animal ethics, exploring material alternatives like cactus and apple leather, local sourcing, and traceability pilots.
Gucci. They seem to be doing quite a bit.
Yes, aiming for carbon neutrality in operations and their supply chain. Strong focus on circularity with initiatives like Gucci Scrapless, using regenerative cotton and recycled fibers in denim, creating a circular hub in Italy. Increasing use of traceable and recycled materials generally, like in their off-the-grid collection.
Yeah.
They have a climate action plan with emission reduction targets, moving towards renewable energy, localizing production by acquiring manufacturers, working on sustainable materials through regenerative agriculture and tech partnerships, creating eco-responsible tweeds, even looking at reducing the carbon footprint of their website.
Hermes, known for longevity already.
Exactly. They focus on circularity in manufacturing, R&D into alternatives like mycelium leather again, extensive repair services, which are core to their brand, an upcycling department called Petit H, localized production, emissions targets, and a commitment to employing people with disabilities.
Burberry. They got that SBTI approval, right?
Yes, first luxury brand with an approved net zero goal from the Science Based Targets Initiative. They issued a sustainability bond, invested in a supplier to embed sustainability, banned exotic leathers, set targets for traceable certified materials like organic cotton, and have circularity projects like Burberry Fabric and a resale partnership.
Louis Vuitton. Part of LVMH.
Right. Their environmental plan covers biodiversity, climate, circular creativity, and traceability, with SBTI-validated targets. Goals for responsible sourcing, using certified leather, water-free processes, recyclable packaging, and investing in climate projects.
Dior, also LVMH.
Aligned with the group's roadmap, biodiversity, climate, circular economy, transparency. Partnerships for recycled materials, like with Parley for the Oceans, using ocean plastic, and developing sustainable store concepts.
Prabha Group.
They've formalized their sustainability commitment, submitted emissions targets to SBTI, focus on diversity and inclusion, maintain a relatively short supply chain, invested in a tannery for better control, using more renewable energy, exploring alternatives like their re-nylon made from recycled ocean plastic and fishing nets, sustainable packaging, and even taking out sustainability-linked loans.
And lastly, Yves Saint Laurent, part of Kering.
Yes, so aligned with Kering's targets for emissions reduction, committed to renewable energy, they're fur-free, have traceability goals for key materials like cotton, silk, wool, aiming for complete leather traceability, reducing waste through initiatives giving offcuts a second life, and have a strategy focused on raw material impact.
Wow, okay, so quite a lot happening at the luxury end, even if it's from a different starting point than fast fashion.
Definitely seems to be a significant focus for many of them now.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, several themes just keep coming up, don't they?
They really do. They're all interconnected.
There's that constant tension,
Okay.
the cost of doing things sustainably versus what consumers expect to pay,
Absolutely. And the huge potential of the circular economy, but it's still held back by technology limitations, especially with recycling blends.
and transparency. It feels like that came up again and again. Crucial for fighting greenwashing, building trust, enabling accountability.
Couldn't agree more. Plus, the growing evidence that sustainability isn't just nice to have, but actually makes business sense. McKinsey's data pointed strongly that way.
Technology is a powerful enabler across the whole chain from design to disposal.
Yes, huge potential there. And finally, seeing those varied but definite commitments from brands, including those in the luxury sector, showing some interesting leadership.
It leaves us with a big question, though.
It does. A really important one for you, the listener, to consider. Given all these complex factors we've discussed, the costs, the tech hurdles, the need for transparency, consumer behavior, what single factor do you think will be the most critical, the most pivotal in really shifting the entire fashion industry towards a genuinely sustainable future?
Is it going to be a massive technological breakthrough, maybe in recycling or new materials?
Or will it be much stricter government regulations forcing the industry's hand?
Or perhaps it needs to be a more fundamental shift in our own values as consumers, how we think about clothes, what we demand from brands.
It's definitely something to reflect on. Maybe dig deeper into these sources we mentioned or explore other research. What's the key that unlocks that sustainable future for fashion?